Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling maybe one of the biggest hurdles for people coming into the 12 steps, that old spiritual side of things.
Absolutely. The God language, the higher power, it can immediately put people off, especially, if you identify as agnostic or atheist.
Right, it creates this wall. The sources actually call it unreasoning prejudice, which is a strong term.
It is, but it highlights how powerful that resistance can be. We're talking about folks facing like total alcoholic destruction, literally staring death in the face.
And yet, this spiritual concept is the thing they just can't get past, that immediate, almost visceral antagonism.
Yeah. So our mission today really is to unpack that, to look at the source material and see how it actually guides people who aren't coming from a traditional religious background.
Focusing on that core idea,
Yeah.
God as we understood him.
Exactly. It's not about conversion. It's practical. It's about finding something that works, something that can, save your life. We want to show how flexible and non-dogmatic this path is designed to be.
Okay, let's start right there. In that crisis moment, someone's maybe been on a terrible run, drunk for 60 days around the clock, like the book says. Everything's falling apart.
Total chaos.
So why, when faced with that, is the spiritual idea the biggest sticking point? You'd think the physical pain, losing your family, that would be enough.
Well, it often comes down to the ego, doesn't it? The
Mhm.
source material talks about obstinacy, being overly sensitive, prejudice.
Uh-huh.
The person often sees themselves as, pretty smart, someone who's always relied on their own intellect, their own willpower. And when that completely fails,
The ego just digs in its heels, refuses to admit defeat.
pretty much. Admitting that something outside of your own control might be the answer, that's a tough pill to swallow. So that initial resistance to anything spiritual is almost like a defense mechanism for that last bit of self-will.
That makes sense. It's the ultimate control issue then. And if addiction is, like they say, a form of insanity, repeating the same destructive behavior,
Expecting a different result, yeah.
how do the sources link that insanity to the ego?
They draw a really direct line. They say a person's insanity and ego were curiously linked. The ego is what keeps whispering, you've got this, or this time will be different, or you're special, the rules don't apply.
Right. That's the insanity talking.
It is. And to break free from that cycle, that destructive pattern, the ego has to take a back seat. It needs to be, surrendered.
Okay, but wait. If the ego is so tied up with the insanity, how does step 2, believing a power greater than ourselves, could restore us to sanity? How does that feel like a glorious release? Isn't admitting you're insane just another massive hit to the ego?
It is a hit to the ego, no doubt, but the sources suggest the payoff is immediate. That moment of really accepting that self-will has failed
Yeah.
is described as this glorious release from being all alone. Think about it. Before that, you're trying to manage this impossible progressive illness all by yourself, totally isolated in your own head, your own denial.
That sounds exhausting
Bam.
and terrifying.
Exactly. So the release comes from finally putting down that massive weight, handing over the struggle, the constant fight, to something, someone, with far broader shoulders, as they put it.
Oh, okay. So it's less about finding God in that moment and more about escaping the crushing loneliness and the impossible burden of trying to fix it yourself.
That's a huge part of it. And that shift is vital because the active alcoholic is often living in what the sources call spiritual unreality.
Spiritual unreality. What does that mean exactly?
It means living in defiance, basically. Believing your willpower alone can beat biology, beat obsession. The spiritual work starts when you finally drop that fight, that antagonism, and become open-minded. Applying the same open-mindedness you might have used in other areas of life.
Especially when the alternative is, destruction.
Right, which brings us to that catalyst you mentioned earlier, hitting bottom. The literature really stresses this.
How essential is that? Does everyone have to crash and burn completely? And is it just about external circumstances or something deeper?
It seems pretty crucial. The sources say few people sincerely try the program unless they've hit that point of utter desperation. In the crisis, it's definitely physical, emotional, financial, but the deepest part is spiritual, existential, really.
Oh.
It's that moment you're forced to confront the spiritual unreality of his life and the absolute nature of his dependence upon alcohol. Realizing alcohol has become the center of your universe, the thing you need to function.
That's also the thing that's killing you.
Exactly. That impossible paradox. We see it in those stories, don't we? The person sick and alone and desperate after days of drinking literally can't stand up and finally gets that their arrogance was stopping them from even trying to get help.
Or that chilling line from the person who just decided, I'm going to drink myself to death. That's bottom.
That's pure existential terror. Hitting bottom means those old ways of thinking, the defiance, the self-reliance, they just don't work anymore. They're impossible. The person still drinking couldn't imagine adopting the humility needed for the steps.
But when the denial finally shatters,
When you're forced to admit, okay, powerlessness isn't just a word, it's my reality, that's when you're ready. Ready to start reclaiming who you really are through the steps. It's the ego's final surrender to what is.
okay, so you've hit that point. That psychological surrender has happened. And then comes step one. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. That word, though, powerless. If your self-esteem is already shot.
Yeah, that can land really hard. It's a critical point. And the sources absolutely acknowledge it. They mention, especially sometimes for women, that hearing powerless can actually make them feel even more depressed than when she was using.
Which seems totally counterproductive if recovery is about building yourself back up.
Right. So the program is smart about this. It gives you the freedom, the flexibility to understand that step in a way that fits your experience. The point isn't to say you, the person, are worthless or powerless in general. It's about recognizing the immense power of the addiction.
Okay, distinguishing the illness from the person.
Exactly. And this is where the sources bring in that other word you mentioned, surrender.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, there's this great story about Sandy. She found focusing on powerless just didn't work for her. It felt diminishing. But reframing it as surrender, like surrendering to the truth, that clicked.
How so? What's the difference?
Surrender feels more like an act of choice, a courageous act even. It's looking reality square in the face and saying, okay, my way isn't working. This thing is bigger than my willpower. For her, starting recovery was an act of surrendering to that reality, accepting that trying to manage it on her own had failed.
That shift in perspective is really interesting. But what makes this a real deep dive is how the sources actually connect this spiritual idea of surrender to, well, the biology of addiction.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. They draw this parallel between the spiritual need and the scientific understanding. Addiction, medically speaking, is a chronic disease, and the organ that's impaired is the brain.
The decision-making organ.
The very organ responsible for choices, emotions, thinking, motivation. It's become pathological. Its wiring is off.
Okay, so there's the problem, right? The broken brain have to decide to get better. How does that even work? It's like asking a faulty computer to debug its own code.
You've hit it exactly. That biological reality is precisely why step one has to be so absolute. The literature talks about the brain's motivational systems, the dopamine system driving craving and wanting, and the opioid circuits dealing with pleasure and reward. Addiction hijacks these circuits, ramps them up pathologically. So when the addiction is severe, the biological pull away from health is often stronger than simple willpower.
So you're saying the spiritual act of surrender isn't just like a nice idea or a moral thing.
Yeah.
It's actually a necessary step to overcome the brain's malfunction.
It seems to be the functional way to bypass that impaired decision-making center. You can't just keep telling yourself, don't drink, don't drink. That actually feeds the obsession in a way. The mind needs something else, something bigger to focus on.
Something to divert it from the compulsion.
Yes. An act of surrender, basically handing over the reins of that broken internal system to an outside process, or a power becomes necessary because the self, the brain's normal functioning, is compromised. The spiritual truth lines up with the scientific reality here.
Okay, so if self-will is the problem and the brain is biologically compromised, the solution has to come from outside the self.
Makes sense.
But for the agnostic or atheist, that outside can't just be handed down by traditional religion, which brings us back to that absolute commitment the program makes to being non-dogmatic. How does it actually protect that openness?
The source material couldn't be clearer on this. It states explicitly that AA, as a society, must never get into dogma or theology.
Then why not?
The reason given is incredibly practical. Doing so would kill our usefulness by getting bogged down in theological contention. Simple as that. If it became tied to one specific faith, it would instantly shut the door on millions of people who desperately need help but don't share those specific beliefs. It would fail its main purpose.
That's a really strong commitment to just helping the person who needs help, regardless of belief. But how does that square with the fact that the steps themselves seem to have deep spiritual roots? I mean, the sources mention Catholic theologians seeing parallels with Ignatian exercises.
Right, and that just shows steps are tapping into something universal about human psychology and spiritual change, not a specific doctrine. The key ingredients seem to be sincerity and desperation, not theological knowledge.
Okay.
Think about that famous story of the atheist. He's hit bottom, can't get drunk, can't stay sober, just utter despair. And he cries out, God, what am I going to do?
And his sponsor apparently said, that's a good first prayer.
Yep. Why? Because it worked. It wasn't about belief. It was about pure need. It broke through his internal block just enough for him to reach out. The program cares about what works spiritually, not what you call it or how you define it intellectually. If you're blocked by the word God,
Find a power greater than you.
that's it. Find something, anything that isn't your own compromised self-will.
So, practically speaking, for someone who's agnostic, where does that power reside? What are some concrete examples the sources give, beyond just, vague concepts?
The definition has to be flexible, right? So people can find their own way in. For a lot of newcomers, the most obvious, tangible power greater than themselves is the group.
The AA meeting itself.
Yeah. Seeing maybe 10, 20, 100 people who are just like you, hopeless, beaten, and now they're sober. That's undeniable power. It immediately breaks that feeling of isolation. You find, as they say, true kinship. You're not alone anymore.
Okay, the group makes sense. Are there other examples for people who maybe struggle with the group being, well, still just other flawed humans?
Absolutely. The sources talk about one person who decided the AA program itself, the steps, the principles, this tested path that was the power greater than him. It had the power to restore sanity.
The structure itself.
The structure, the wisdom in it. Others might turn to the universe or the laws of nature, or even just abstract principles like love or morality, something bigger than their own ego. The core idea is always moving from self-obsession,
Which is the root of the problem.
to connection with something larger, anything larger.
That framework leads perfectly into step 3 then. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. This feels like the real turning point, from thinking to doing.
It is. Step 3 is that definite choice, that positive action to actually change direction. It requires two things. Having found some kind of God of my understanding, however you define it.
Even if it's just the group or the program to start.
Right. Plus a genuine willingness to let go of the reins, to stop trying to run the whole show yourself. The action is kind of like saying, okay, thy will be done, even if thy is still pretty fuzzy at first. Maybe thy will just means the way of recovery or what the sober people are suggesting.
And why is just making that decision so powerful? Is it the commitment itself?
It changes the whole engine of sobriety. The sources make this really crucial distinction. The recovery that comes after step 3 is sustained by this higher power you've connected with, rather than by virtue of endurance. If you're just white-knuckling it, relying on your own willpower.
You're back to using the broken engine, the impaired brain.
Exactly. But if you rely on this higher power, this external support system you've decided to trust, you're tapping into something reliable. That decision, that surrender in step 3, provides the foundation for lasting change.
Okay, so steps 1, 2, and 3 lay the foundation. Admission, belief, decision. Then the program gets really practical, moving into action. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Wow, that sounds intimidating, like digging up every mistake you ever made.
It definitely sounds daunting, doesn't it? Especially when you're already feeling pretty low about yourself. Guilt, shame, it's heavy stuff. But the sources actually frame it quite differently. Much more gently, almost therapeutically. They talk about it as an act of profound self-acceptance. The goal isn't really to beat yourself up or agonize over the past.
So what is the goal?
Insight, mostly. Understanding, discovering maybe just one tiny thing about yourself that helps you see patterns, understand why you did things. It's really about getting to know yourself honestly, maybe for the first time, without all the denial.
And there's a very specific instruction. You have to write it down. Not just think about it. Why is writing so important here? Why can't you just do it in your head?
Because, well, the mind, especially, the mind caught in addiction and denial run by that ego is incredibly good at editing, rationalizing, minimizing.
Conveniently forgetting things?
Oh, yeah. You can twist things around in your head endlessly.
Yeah.
But when you write it down on paper, it's just there, concrete, harder to deny, and to get that fearless honesty they talk about. Yeah. The advice is to write it as if no one will ever read it, just for you.
Yeah.
That helps break down the fear of judgment, even from yourself.
Yeah.
And the inventory itself is structured, right? Looking at resentments, fears, harms done.
Resentments seem like a big focus.
Huge. They call resentment the #1 offender, holding on to anger, bitterness. It's poison for recovery, so cleaning house on that stuff is top priority.
Okay, writing it all down, every resentment, fear, harm, sounds like a massive task. How does that connect to step 5, where you actually have to share this stuff with someone else?
Ugh, step 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. This is the antidote to that isolation we talked about earlier. The
Aha.
sources say this is the step that really breaks down that feeling of being separate, unique in your awfulness. When you share those things you thought were unforgivable, those secrets the ego insisted you had to hide.
You find out you're not alone.
Exactly. You find out other people have felt the same things, done similar things. You find kinship. That huge burden of secrecy just lifts. And that makes space for real humility.
Humility. That brings us to step 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. If the ego's the enemy, what does humility mean in this context? Especially if you're not religious. It's not about groveling, is it?
Not at all. The way it's defined is actually really beautiful and simple. Perpetual quietness of heart.
Quietness of heart.
Yeah. It's more about inner peace, acceptance, not humiliation or thinking you're worthless. It's about finally grasping that humbling truth. We are not completely in charge of when and how our lives will change.
Accepting limitations.
Accepting limitations, acknowledging those defects of character you uncovered in step 4, and realizing that your own willpower, that same faulty mechanism, probably isn't enough to just get rid of those deeply ingrained patterns. You need help from that power greater than yourself.
So step 7 isn't about begging. It's more like opening a door.
That's a great way to put it. It's opening yourself to change, asking for help, and then letting the greater power, however you understand it, do the heavy lifting. It's about cooperating with change, rather than trying to force it through sheer will. It replaces that ego-driven grandiosity with, well, quiet realism.
Okay. And that acceptance, that humility, allows you to finally look outwards towards making things right with others. Step 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed. There's something really important here about who belongs on that list, isn't there? Something often overlooked.
Yes, absolutely crucial. You must include yourself on that list.
Yourself. Why?
Because the harm wasn't just external. Think about what addiction does to your self-respect, your physical health, your relationship with your own values, your conscience. That self-destructive pattern causes immense harm to the self.
So you need to make amends to yourself, too.
In a way, yes. The sources actually say that the act of recovery itself, getting sober, working these steps, building a new life, is the living amends you make to yourself. It's how you heal the damage done to your own self-worth and well-being.
Wow, okay. That puts the whole amends process in a different light. You can't really make things right with others if you're still fundamentally at war with yourself.
It's hard to, yeah. The point of steps 8 and 9, making the list and then making direct amends where you can, is about restoring peace, making restitution where possible, mainly for the sake of those you harmed, not just to make yourself feel better. By dealing with the internal damage, step 8, and then taking action externally, step 9, you break free from that self-centered isolation that fueled the whole thing.
Which leads us to the ongoing maintenance, step 11.
Yeah?
Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. Again, for the agnostic or atheist, how does this work without traditional prayer?
Well, first off, the sources call this an individual adventure, something each one of us works out in his own way. There are no rigid rules.
So no prescribed way to meditate or pray.
Nope. The goal is simply functional. Improve that conscious contact with whatever power you've come to rely on, whether you call it God, grace, wisdom, love, the universe. The label isn't the point. The connection is.
So if someone isn't praying in the usual sense, what might their meditation look like? What forms can it take?
It could be incredibly simple, just pausing, taking 10 minutes to be quiet, seek stillness, maybe ask for guidance for the day ahead. It's about creating space to be fully willing to receive qualities like honesty, unselfishness, love, things that are out there in the fellowship, in the universe, but maybe got blocked by our own, selfishness, intellectual pride, fear. And seeking that contact can happen in lots of ways, too. It might be looking for guidance in what other people say and events that happen, maybe noticing coincidences, or paying attention to your gut feelings, your intuition, even your dreams.
So it's more about cultivating an attitude of listening, of being open.
Exactly. A listening heart, rather than just broadcasting demands or complaints.
And the payoff for this practice. It's not just about feeling vaguely spiritual, is it? It ties back to that initial struggle.
Absolutely. One of the first most tangible results they talk about is emotional balance. By consciously trying to connect with something outside your own head, your own churning emotions, step 11, you start to build stability. You learn to pause, to not just react. It acts like a daily course correction against the ego flaring up again, against that emotional roller coaster of active addiction. It's intensely practical.
So going through these steps, finding some kind of power, it leads to this massive personal shift. The sources use that analogy of putting on a new pair of glasses. Things look different.
Totally different. You start seeing possibilities instead of just problems. Chuck C's story is often mentioned, moving from the absolute depths to genuine, lasting sobriety. He talks about uncovering this life just brimming with hope, serenity, and purpose.
A life that was hidden before.
Hidden by the fog of self-obsession and the constant need for alcohol. With the new glasses on, you start seeing the world and your place in it through a lens of connection, maybe service, rather than just constant self-demand.
Let's talk specifics. What are the actual emotional changes people experience? How does this new life feel different, especially when it comes to things like happiness or fun?
Well, the whole emotional landscape changes. Active addiction is often about chasing that immediate, intense, but very short-lived pleasure, that chemical hit.
The dopamine rush.
Right, which always leads to a crash and usually deeper misery in the long run. But in recovery, the sources talk about finding real fun, not just fleeting pleasure, but a kind of exaltation of spiritual living.
Exaltation, that sounds pretty intense.
It does, but it points to something deep and sustainable. This way of living based on honesty, connection, helping others. It leads to this feeling described as outrageous joy. It's not a chemical high. It's a sense of rightness, of purpose that endures.
So the spiritual path provides an internal source of well-being that alcohol could only mimic temporarily and destructively.
That's the idea. And it systematically replaces that constant background hum of fear and restlessness.
Which is so common in addiction.
With this deep sense of calm, peace. The sources describe it beautifully, a peace, as unruffled by what goes on outside, as the depths of the sea.
Wow. Unmoved by surface storms.
Yeah, because you start to realize you're not the center of the universe anymore. You're not solely responsible for everything, and you're not totally thrown off by the chaos of purely human affairs. You feel supported, anchored by something larger than your own anxieties.
That sense of calm sounds linked to feeling connected
Right.
to something bigger, that idea of oneness.
Definitely. The spiritual understanding really pushes you to let go of that feeling of being separate, isolated. When you consciously try to connect with the infinite spirit of life, or just the positive forces you see working in recovery and the world, you start to feel that no good thing will be withheld. Not in a greedy way, but a sense of trust. Trust that you'll have what you need. It centers you, lets you face challenges with the same kind of inner calm you have on good days. It's realizing you're part of this bigger picture, and your recovery isn't just about your own grit. It's supported by that whole system. It leads to, well, the richest life possible. #tag outro.
So wrapping this up, our deep dive into the God question for agnostics and atheists really shows that the spiritual heart of recovery isn't about signing up for a specific religion or dogma at all.
Not in the slightest. It boils down to practical things.
Yeah.
Humility, just knowing you don't have all the answers, radical honesty, especially with yourself, and taking action, making that decision to surrender the ego that's running riot.
To some kind of supportive power, whether you call it God or the universe or the program or just the combined strength of the people in the rooms.
Whatever is strong enough to actually restore sanity. It's the realization that your own intellect, your own willpower, just wasn't enough for this particular problem. You have to open up to something bigger.
And the sources are clear. That process does transform the inner chaos into that deep, steady calm we talked about. Lets you actually live life fully.
And that transformation naturally leads to the final piece, doesn't it? Service. Step 12. That idea that you can't keep this amazing gift of recovery unless you give it away, it sounds like a paradox.
But it's fundamental.
As the ultimate connection. You realize your own survival is tied to the group's survival, that you're just a small part of a great whole. And suddenly, helping others isn't a chore, it's essential maintenance. It keeps you connected to other people and to that higher power you found. It keeps the whole thing working.
So for you listening, we'll leave you with this thought, stemming from that principle of practicing these principles in all areas of your life. If the core spiritual truth here is that we only keep this recovery by giving it away, by connecting, by serving, what's one small way you can acknowledge your part in that great whole today? What tiny act of service or connection could you choose?